Good afternoon. Thank you. I want to thank you all so much for giving up food and conversation to come in here. You're going to enjoy this, I think, tremendously. I'd like to introduce today Dr. Laura Niesen, the Abruna. She began serving as provost of York College on July 1, 2016. She previously served as provost and vice president for academic affairs at Sacred Heart University. Dr. Abruna has a deep involvement with the liberal arts, having majored in English and French at Smith College and having spent a year at the University of Paris. She received a master's degree and a doctoral degree in English from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and a Master of Science in Education and Higher Education Management from the University of Pennsylvania. She has received numerous awards, including 2 Fulbright Fellowships in Belgium and Luxembourg, as well as fellowships with the American Council of Learned Societies, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the National Council on Education. As a faculty member, she worked at Ithaca College, where she became a full professor of English literature. She is the former president of the Association of Chief Academic Officers and is the PI for the Digital Fellows Project, which is what has made this whole project conference possible coming forward. Her presentation is entitled Provost, Pedagogy, and Digital Learning, the Role of the ACAO Digital Fellows Project. Thank you. I turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Ralph. And you all know that Ralph was one of our favorite digital fellows. So he was one of the 32 that you've heard about. So thank you all for being here. And this afternoon, I want to have a talk to you a little bit about the ACAO Digital Fellows Project. And I think my comments work very well with what Casey Green was talking about last night in terms of, the big picture. Karen was talking about 8 individual institutions that were working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And what we're doing is a little bit different from that, in that we're going to focus this afternoon on the role of leadership. So I'm a chief academic officer, and if you didn't get it from that brief bio, I've been a provost for 15 years. So one of the things that we were interested in is, how do you get this embedded? How do you get digital learning embedded in an institution? And can provosts be helpful? I know sometimes we are, sometimes we're not that helpful. But can we be helpful as a group in terms of providing the leverage, providing the leadership, providing the inspiration? So I'll talk a little bit about that this afternoon. The project that began all of the Digital Fellows projects and our regional conferences was something that came out of the Association of Chief Academic Officers. And what this is the only organization in higher education that brings together chief academic officers, vice presidents of academic affairs, provosts from both the public sector and the private sector, and then all up and down the Carnegie classifications. So community colleges, public and private, liberal arts colleges, public and private, 4-year institutions, again, public and private. You get the drift, right? 4-year public, 4-year private, and then even R1s. So we have a board, and what we want to do is to provide resources and assets to other chief academic officers to help them increase the quality of learning, and primarily at the undergraduate level. We don't do a whole lot at the graduate level. And let me start with this project with a quote from Michael Crow. Probably a lot of you know who he is. He's the iconic president of Arizona State University. And what's interesting about him, well, there are a lot of things that are interesting, but one of the things that's interesting is his vision of a R1, a research institution that's also, sort of one of 2 major institutions in that state. And he talks about different waves of university history. So he's got a book. You know, a lot of people have books that go through the whole history of higher education. His does, and he talks about different waves. Well, the fifth wave, which is now, is about institutions that are turning away a little bit from prestige that's based on, gee, how many publications do you have and how many grants do you have? And he's saying that the fifth wave will be marked by a deliberate aspiration to shift to social outcomes through the use of technology and innovation that scales for public value. So I didn't want to read all of that, but the shift there is from, gee, we're a good institution, we're a successful institution because we have grants and we have a lot of publications, to we are successful if we provide public value. So, what are we going to do to provide that public value? We found that higher education now has a social justice reason that's going to focus on having more students graduate, not just access, but graduate with a credential. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation looked into this and provided information that suggested that over 11 million high school graduates are going to get out of high school, and they would not have thought of going to college, but there's an 11 million person gap between now and 2025 of individuals who really need a post-secondary credential in order to access a middle-class lifestyle. And all of us have read all of the Department of Labor statistics that show, yeah, there are going to be a lot more jobs in the next decade, but those jobs are going to be bifurcated. On the one hand, they're going to be low-wage, minimum-wage jobs, which do not provide a middle-class lifestyle. On the other hand, they're going to be high-tech, and those, and also business and also healthcare. Those will all need that post-secondary education. So working with the Gates Foundation and some of the program officers, they've come to the conclusion that what students need to succeed are certain learning outcomes. And these will be very familiar to those of you who are faculty members, because these are the learning outcomes that we try to put in general education. So domain knowledge is the same thing as a major, critical thinking, written communication, oral communication, quantitative thinking, qualitative thinking, and social skills. I would also add creativity. You can't really teach students how to be creative, but you can lead them there. So those skills, people have said, let's put them into general education, and then let's try to deliver them in the first 60 hours. And those 60 hours are oftentimes called gateway courses. Why? Because they are the gateway to the higher level courses and therefore graduation. They're also really important because those gateway courses really define what we mean in higher education by retention. And there's a reason that retention, as well as graduation rates, but retention itself is a very important factor in U.S. News and World Report. Everybody has to give it to iPads, i.e. the government, Department of Education, and that is that gateway there between the first year and the second year is the place where students are statistically most likely to falter, to stop out, or to drop out. And when that happens, of course, they rarely go on and finish their degree. Retention's a big deal. People are talking about it. They have been talking about it all over the country for 20 or 30 years. And a lot of the conversation has been financial aid. What are we going to do to help students financially get through? When you ask students why they leave, the number one reason they give is financial. But what we found is that that covers a lot of other reasons that they're not as comfortable in bringing forth. Some of them have to do with mental health issues. Some of them have to do with social interaction, alienation, no affinity groups, on and on. Lots of different things go into retention, but one thing we haven't really been talking about is not passing courses. And we don't talk about that because there hasn't been a lot of ways, a lot of good ways to get at that, but what we're finding is that some early experiments, particularly at large publics and community colleges that have been conducted by the foundation, have shown promise for the role that digital learning can play if you put it in addition to all those other aspects of retention. So digital learning in either a blended environment, an online environment, combined with high-quality courseware, and I should say face-to-face as well, can improve progression through the first 60 hours of coursework by adapting to students' needs. So that sort of got our attention at ACAO because it was a new way of trying to address the retention issue. And how does it help? Well, when Karen was talking this morning, she gave you a sort of mini insight into how adaptive digital courseware works. And you saw that if a student is pre-tested and they are stopped from progressing through the course, let's say mathematics, and they're asked questions, they're getting that continual feedback from instructors that we know from higher ed research is what students want most in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And they learn best if they're getting fast and frequent feedback. So if I'm the instructor and I'm in a classroom like this that holds several hundred people, I won't give you any individual feedback, probably. I might have a TA that looks at something that I put through a Scantron. But you're not going to get the sort of feedback that high-quality digital adaptive courseware will give you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is closely connected, and that is personalization of learning. If I were an instructor, I might give everybody a pre-test and a post-test. We all do that. That sounds like a good thing to do. But I'm not really going to adapt your learning to what you didn't know before you took the course. But artificial intelligence in the form of digital adaptive courseware can do that. It can personalize learning, which is a little bit ironic for people who think that technology might be impersonal. It becomes more personalized in a very interesting way. Incorporation of active learning strategies, you saw that you can flip the classroom, right? So students can do some of this work if you're in face-to-face on their own. They can get to where they need to go in terms of absorbing those learning objects, and then you can use your classroom time, if it's face-to-face, for more active learning strategies. So you pull together the best of what we've learned in terms of pedagogy and improved instruction by providing real-time access to analytics. That's both while the students are taking the course. As the instructor, you can see where they are, what they've missed, what kind of time on task they've had, where they are in terms of the progression towards learning what the course is intended to teach. And then creating capacity so that students have more options to take the courses needed for graduation. One of the reasons students don't graduate on time, i.e. 4 or 6 years, is that the courses sometimes aren't available. And if you're using digital pedagogy and adaptive learning, particularly in the online varieties, you'll have more opportunities for those students to succeed. Adaptive learning, adaptive courseware is a particular sort of courseware that can be substituted for either part or whole of a physical textbook. So the students are accessing that software and they receive that personalized assessment and digital coaching. Sometimes we call this adaptive hinting. So the Association of Chief Academic Officers was approached by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with the idea of, we know you're all interested in retention because you're interested in your students doing well. Could you design a program so that we can maybe embed this in institutions? And some of our research is showing us that if we can get the attention of presidents or chief academic officers, we might have a great opportunity for bringing this into institutions rather than just going to the faculty ourselves. And we thought maybe that was a good idea because the Gates Foundation doesn't have the, I guess, the gravitas to go right to faculty They could, but it might be a better idea to try to go through the organization and embed it in the organization. So one of the program officers said to me, could you design a developmental program for chief academic officers? And I did. What I thought was, why don't we get about 30, we ended up with 32, provosts from across the country, and we got them together and we gave them about 2 years of a program. We met 4 times, once at Arizona State, once in New Orleans, once in Philadelphia, once in Seattle. We'll meet one more time in Philadelphia. And we would provide them with access to vendors. We had people come to speak from Macmillan. We had John Gardner talk about the DFW rate. So we'd give them some information. And then we also asked them to do the following. If they would go back to their campuses, we gave them a little funding, and choose some faculty champions. And they would decide together what courseware they wanted to use, adaptive digital courseware, at their institution. And then they had a year to choose the courseware, get faculty together, and then try to pilot it in their courses. And what we wanted them to do specifically was to have some sections that were taught as per usual, let's say of chemistry, and then some other sections that would use maybe Alex, maybe Pearson, and then look at the difference in the DFW rates. And remember, we talked about DFW rates last night, that they can be incredibly high in those gateway courses that really get the students out of all kinds of opportunities in all kinds of disciplines. So some of those rates can be 50% or even higher. Okay. So we thought we would take a hold of that project, and the other thing we were trying to do was a little bit less obvious, and that was, we know that chief academic officers are busy people. We know that they have their schedules crammed with meetings all day long and emails afterwards. And to get them to talk to their faculty about something that is a new pedagogy might take a lot. So what we wanted to do is give them the experience so that they would internalize this and then decide, you know what, this is one of my 2 or 3 top priorities. So the Digital Fellows group ended up looking like this, and I'll show you exactly what they look like in a minute. 16 men and 16 women, 9 community colleges. So why were we looking at community colleges? Because if you're talking about that first 60 hours, that's what they do at the community colleges. And we did not want this to be an elitist experiment that was full of R1s and full of institutions from the Northeast. We wanted it to really go to where the students could benefit most. 23 four-year institutions, 2 state systems, so North Dakota and North Carolina, 6 HSIs, 2 HBCUs, 5 private not-for-profits, and 2 private for-profits, which was a little unusual, but we figured if they were going to offer higher education in a digital environment, they could benefit from this project as well. And then a diversity of states, because we wanted this, again, to be national and not to lean toward the Northeast. So we had people from Florida, Ralph, we had an individual from Alaska, Texas, California, Maine, Washington state that is, Georgia, North Dakota, Minnesota, Ohio, West Virginia, North Carolina, and Massachusetts. And this is the group. This is the first group of digital fellows. And if you're looking very closely, you can see Ralph. You know, I didn't mean to do that. Ralph's right there. I'm right there. Casey's there. So this is the group of us. And we had, what? No, the provost from the University of Maine is taller, and that's Jeffrey. So this was a great group of individuals. I think what was mentioned last night, and I'll get back to this in a minute, is that of the 32, only 21 are still in the same position. And I'll give you some insight into that, and I'll get back to that. I don't think we really realized how short-term the provost position is, but we later learned that the average tenure is 3.5 years. So that position turns over very quickly. And one of the things that I did, I mean, I knew that people came and went. So when I invited somebody to be a fellow, I actually demanded that their president write a letter of support, and the president's letter had to say that irrespective of who was personally the provost, Ralph, Laura, Connie, or somebody else, that they would embed this in their institution. They would continue the project even if the provost left, which they all did, and we had to call on these presidents more than once to keep them honest, because if they hadn't written that agreement, they probably would not have continued. So here was the experiment, and we were given $1 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but we've spent almost all of it now. We had to bring all of these people and our speakers back and forth to all of these venues. We also gave each institution some money so they could release faculty from courses, and also a little bit of seed money in case they wanted to buy software. So what we wanted to do is have them go back and choose those faculty champions. Some of them actually created a mini digital fellows project on their own campus. So 2 or 3 of the chief academic officers said, do you mind if I use your phrase digital fellow? And I'm going to go back and I'm going to be you. I'm going to do what you're doing and at my institution, and I'm going to choose digital fellows, and I'm going to take the money you're giving us and spread it out that way. And you know what else? I'm going to put another $10,000 from my budget, because provosts can do that if they're motivated. I'm going to take money from my budget, or I'm going to ask the president to make this a strategic enterprise decision. And we're going to take a hard look at those DFW numbers. And first of all, we asked them to do 5 operational things. They had to identify resources that would be helpful to their institutions. So what does that mean? We were not prescriptive about what courseware you had to use. So there was a variety of courseware. I would say that the most common one, just like the 8 institutions you heard about this morning, was ALEX for developmental mathematics. But there were a variety of others. They had to work with their own people. So this is why the process is important, in that the chief academic officer was going to gather people and say, we have a little money, we have a little prestige from being associated with this grant. Now we're going to choose the software that makes sense for us in the course that makes sense for us. So everything had to be really processed on the individual level. And then we asked them to conduct a pilot on their campuses that would integrate digital courseware into the curriculum. And they could do that any way they wanted. They could flip the classroom, they could do a blended, they could do face-to-face, they could do completely online. And we had all of those variations. And then 3, make the adoption of digital courseware a strategic enterprise decision by institutional leaders. That's where chief academic officers can be helpful. If you get them to bring what is going on in pedagogy and really be the champion for the instructional designers and the champion for the people who are working for the CIO, and bring it to the board of trustees and bring it to the president and say, I need more resources for this. This is really important. This could be a watershed moment. And it's something that faculty could do, but it's a whole lot easier if you can grab the chief academic officer by the scruff of the neck and have that person go in and be the institutional champion for you. The other reason that you want it to be a strategic decision is that's how you get it embedded in an institution. Everybody hates administrators who come in and say, look at all these great ideas that I have. There's this fad, there's this idea, I'm padding my CV, I'm going to be gone in 3.5 years, remember? Okay? And everybody says, oh, this too shall pass, this person will go, and what have you. Well, we don't want that to happen with digital adaptive learning, so that if it becomes part of the fabric of the institution, then it doesn't matter who the provost is. So let me give you an example. General education had been thrown out when I was in college. Everybody said, well, we don't want anything that prescriptive. And then it started to come back in, and now everybody has a general education program. It's hard to remember, unless you're my age, a time when it didn't exist. And that was a very brief interval. It was in, it was out, it's back in again. But no matter who comes to your campus as the president or the provost, they will not mess with general education because it's embedded, the faculty own it. They would be horrified if you suggested that maybe we could do without it next year. That's what you want with adaptive digital courseware, that it becomes so embedded in the fabric of the institution that even if you have a new provost or a new president or both of them, they wouldn't dare mess with that. They would mess with something different. So the pilots on the campuses, they went on at different times. Usually people spent the first semester, so they were designated as a fellow in the summer. First semester, they were working with their faculty, and in the spring, they would do the pilot. And we would ask them to report on gains in retention and increased learning on their campus. So what did they use, or what disciplines were most popular? Developmental mathematics was the most popular, hands down. Pre-calculus, and then calculus, introductory courses in many of the gateway disciplines. We had some experiments in chemistry, physics, some areas of history and English, composition, and specialty courses such as the visual arts, and also the digital fellow from the University of Alaska Southeast did an experiment with fisheries, very big in the Aleutian Islands. So, semifinal reports were due in the summer, and the CAOs were asked to write a case study, right? I mean, these are sort of mini case studies for each one of these institutions, but we asked all of them to identify the top 5 findings about their projects. And by far the most frequent finding was the importance of faculty buy-in. We already knew that. The importance of faculty buy-in, but also engagement for the process and the pilots to be successful. Not all of the pilots were successful. A couple of them were not, and when they were not, it was generally because something went wrong in the process, how the chief academic officer was working with the faculty and the deans and the instructional designers and all of the people involved. Something went wrong with that leadership process. So number 1, faculty buy-in and engagement. And as the chief academic officer at Athens State said, once people learned to use the technology, they immediately implemented it with success. So this reinforced what I always knew as a faculty member and then as an administrator. Faculty will be skeptical of something new, and they will not do it just because you think it's a good idea, but if you show them that it has real potential to help students succeed, they will implement it on their own. Semifinal reports also pointed out, in terms of the second most frequent finding, the importance of leadership and embedding digital learning into the campus community. So what we were looking at, the role of the chief academic officer, actually was helpful. Other findings included the need for clarity, like what are we doing on our campus exactly? What is this experiment? What is this courseware? And people were at different points. The need to assess institutional context. We had everything from a very, very small community college that had 1,500 people to the University of Central Florida, which had about 64,000. And so the pilots on those two campuses were very different, but we were not grading. This was not about who was more important than whom. Cost came up, vendor relations, the learning curve for faculty, and collaboration. So the early results point to the fact that our identification of high-level leadership has been reinforced by the experiences of the digital fellows. Now, we had a lot of fun spending most of that $1 million on all of our digital fellows. We had one convening in New Orleans, which was notable because each digital fellow brought a whole team from their campus. So there were a lot of us in the French Quarter, and we all talked about what was going on the campuses. That was a lot of fun, but we ended up having some more money. So what we decided to do is to sponsor regional conferences where, again, we would ask one of the digital fellows to reproduce what we were doing in the larger project. And so we started at Clark Atlanta University, and we brought together with that digital fellow HBCUs in the southern area. We had a regional in November at Austin Community College. That was the place with the big mall that had the computers in it. We had recently, this was 2 weeks ago, a Colorado regional conference. We had on the same day in February, 2 of them, one at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and one at IUPUI for Indiana regional institutions. And then this is the last one. This is the last regional, because now, in fact, we are running out of money on this first take. Thought I'd stay for another 2 weeks in Florida and really run it out, but can't really do that. So in conclusion, we found that the use of digital adaptive courseware at institutions of higher education can be accelerated and even embedded through an initial engagement of the leadership at the highest levels of CAOs and even presidents who champion it as part of their strategic plan for social justice and student success. So back to Michael Crow, back to the 5th wave of universities. And then once it's embedded in the culture as an effective practice that promotes deeper learning, the scaling will take place through the faculty themselves. So in effect, the amount of money that each institution got outside of travel and so forth was really very small. It was only about $6,000. And what we found is that you don't have to give institutions enormous amounts of money to get this done, although you can. We found actually that with our CAOs, when we asked them, would you have done this without a lot of money? Would you have done this if you had had to pay to be part of this learning engagement? They said yes, they would have been willing to pay to be a digital fellow. I thought that's very interesting and maybe a move forward. The Gates money was wonderful. I see it as a way of seeding what could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. So thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Yes.
I have a question. So thank you. This is really interesting to learn about this program. I was really struck by how in the early part of the presentation, a lot of the headers were digital pedagogy, but then the focus of the program, from my limited understanding of this, seems to be about finding and then piloting the courseware. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where the pedagogy and the faculty come in. You said that instructor feedback was really important. Of course, adaptive learning or non-instructor feedback, or they're more automating that process. So I was wondering if this fellows program had any components that were focused on nurturing a culture of pedagogical innovation that uses the digital tools rather than finding a digital tool to do.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we think that what you're asking about was going on within the institution. So the outer circle was me getting chief academic officers to work with their individuals on campus to choose digital courseware and then to conduct that pilot. But what we were really relying on is the expertise of, the chief academic officers as leaders to conduct a process that would involve the pedagogy. And I know we didn't talk much about instructional designers, but they're key to that, as well as centers for teaching and learning. So a lot of that took place as this process was moving forward. And what we were trying to do is seed a process too. So we hope that that would move forward as things progressed on the campus. So thank you. Any other questions or comments? I know we're a little bit over time, so thank you very much.